Hi, this is Jeanette Knighton, and this is the fourth and final part of my conversation with my co-author on the Contract Professionals Playbook on the effects of the rolling pandemic and how it might apply to you, the contract professional. Lawrence, welcome yet again.
Yeah, I noticed you have a blank, like a book display little thing over your shoulder, where there should be a copy of our book sitting there, since that's what we're talking about.
Do you know why my book is not there?
No, I don't.
I am creating the test for the IAOP because we're considering developing a specified designation for the International Association for Outsourcing Professionals. So I have my book at home, and I'm marking it up, and I'm writing the test for that designation as we speak. That's why there's a blank space over my shoulder.
Well, that's a lot better than just showing a book over your shoulder and going, cool, look at the book. So
no, it's cool. Hopefully in a few months, there'll be yet another reason to take the Contract Professional Playbook e-learning series.
There you go.
Okay. So
and I was teasing you about not being commercial, and there we go. We made a commercial by accident.
All right.
This is why we're on the buy side, not the sell side, folks, just so you know.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and let's get into governance. So you've mentioned governance in passing in previous videos. And if you're new to this video, there are 3 other segments. Please go to the YouTube channel to watch them. Each one deals with a different aspect of the rolling pandemic. And we'll date stamp this as June 2020. So let's talk about best practices and governance. And let me set the scene a little bit. One of the clients that I'm supporting has best practices for governance, but they are word of mouth by the more senior baby boomer generation. So the folks that are, in one case, over 60, right? So it's the late 50s, early 60s, and one gentleman is significantly older. And so they know how to bring people in, they know how to have conversations, they know how to solve problems that come up, but it's not formalized. So really what I want to talk to you about is how can we encourage contract professionals to start thinking about best practices in governance and then formalizing maybe those tribal knowledge best practices as such as my client.
Yeah, so let's back up a little bit and get to the why, right? So we have this great sourcing strategy, and it turns into a solicitation, and we make the best contract on the history of the universe, and then we sort of throw it over the wall to some supplier and somebody in, let's say it's IT, some IT person to go manage that supplier and go, toodles, have fun. When we do that, the industry would say there's 17 to 40% value leakage. So if we think we saved $1 million, guess what? We didn't. We might even cost more than we thought we saved. So we have to have governance in place, and typically it's around 5% of the value of the contract if we're talking like an outsourcing deal, something that's big and relatively complex and long term on both sides. It's a supplier thing and it's a buyer thing. And if we don't do that on both sides, stuff happens, right? And for the supplier, typically they end up either having to recompete for their work or they end up being a one and done, right? For the buyer, typically the business case erodes and it just doesn't end well. There's everything from data breaches to, all kinds of bad stuff happens. So governance is absolutely imperative. The challenge is for contract professionals, a lot of times governance is not our responsibility, it's somebody else's. So we're putting the structure in place to make sure that governance can happen post-contract. That includes
in an ideal world, we put the structure in place post-contract and that it's not just winging it.
Oh, okay, fair enough. If you do it ideally correctly, you've talking about this way back in the strategy phase, and by the time you sign the deal, everything is there.
Correct.
And actually a best practice that IOP talks about is you have something called rules of engagement. So the structure in the contract is, maybe it'll say, for example, there's a 2 in the box structure in a program office that's going to manage this thing with buyer and supplier sitting next to each other. Well, great. Contract that works fantastic, but to actually implement it, you actually need things like who's on first and what's their phone number and their email and all that, right? So the rules of engagement actually operationalize what's in the contract. And that's created jointly with the supplier during transition or assumption of service, depending on how you use the term. The way I use it, assumption of service is upfront, transitions at the end of the contract, but whatever. The point is you do it together so that by the time you get to day one and whatever your acceptance is, like, you transferred operations and hardware, software, services, whatever the supplier now owns, things are up and running, they're meeting the SLAs with acceptance criteria, and bingo, we can consider our assumption of service done. Now we're in steady state. By the time you're in steady state, all that governance is in play. That's things like relationship management, contract change management, operations management, risk issue and opportunity management, blah, 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 right? All that stuff is up and running. It's been tested, just like your business continuity planning. You're testing your governance too, to make sure that everything is running smoothly now, right? Because day one governance is the best it'll ever be. It's probably going to go downhill from there. So if you have a good structure, it'll only go a little bit downhill instead of a lot.
Yeah. Let's talk about the 3 tiers from Vested. You and I are both very familiar with it. I've co-authored books with Kate Fatasic, and they're the Vested Outsourcing Manual and Getting to We. We also bring those concepts into the Contract Professionals Playbook. What are the 3 tiers, and which, in your estimation, your practice, what's the most important of those 3 tiers?
Yeah, so if you picture kind of the traditional hierarchical triangle, what Vested does, it flips it upside down. And so you've got this kind of operating level set of work, a kind of a management level set of work, and an executive level sort of work. And the idea is that you really want to have a joint, in a Vested deal, you want to have really joint governance using insight rather than oversight.
Correct.
Which is a key difference to sort of the classical way of doing things. So if you have a strategic contract where it is more of a partnership, you're going to do it that way. And the most important thing is actually that structure. If you're doing a normal outsourcing relationship, the most important thing is really the operations level and having an escalation path to get up to the executives if things can't be resolved at a lower level.
Mm-hmm. What level do you think is the level that you see used the most? Because you're an IOP COP-Gov, so you've got this special designation around governance. What do you see used the most? The operational level, the mid-management level, or the executive oversight level?
I think the operational level in a good running, if we have good people skills and we're doing the performance management not through SLAs and compliance, but rather more through relationships,
right.
Everything happens at the lowest level because you figure out a way to work it out. It's when you don't have that solid relationship foundation that you start moving it up and up and up, right? So I'll give you an example. Maybe you have an SLA around billing accuracy and the supplier misses it, and they miss it because they had some kind of system error and it generated a bad bill. You can work that out. No big deal. Send us a new invoice. It's fine. If instead they mess that SLA because they passed along fraudulent charges, or they went to the strip club and had a $10,000 bill and tried to pawn it off on you, this is a real example, by the way. Not from my company, but it is a real example. Or something like that, right? If it's fraud, waste, and abuse, that is a totally different thing. So there's the well-intentioned oops, and there's the ill intent. Mm-hmm. Even with good relationships, the ill intent is going to escalate because we're going to remove that account team or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But most companies operate in a professional manner. By talking buy side and sell side, which means that usually that operations level, if you're good at it, you work everything out and almost nothing ever gets escalated other than success stories, right? Because you go up to the, to the steering committee level and go, hey, look what we did. And you go up to the executive level and go, hey, look what we did. And, and it gives you the opportunity to change the conversation to roadmaps and strategic, innovation and how do we work together? And is there a go-to-market opportunity or some, natural extension of what we're doing, as opposed to the supplier missed the SLA, supplier gave me a fraudulent invoice, supplier, so-and-so did, blah, 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 right? Think about it like kids, right? Are you running to mommy and daddy all the time and going, hey, my brother pinched me or whatever?
Yeah.
Or are you working it out and playing nice together? If you're
So
working out playing nice together, that's what we should be.
yeah, so I've got an example. So setting up some governance in a really tense relationship some years back, and the account exec on the supply side was a woman, and I was facilitating, and there were maybe 6, 7 people in the room, and I'm using my facilitation skills. Let me make sure I understand what I'm hearing, etc. And the woman was very calm, but I could tell she was really irritated. And so I said, so tell me, does it feel like you're making Thanksgiving dinner with your mother-in-law standing over your shoulder, criticizing everything that you're doing? You're not stirring the gravy. That's not how my son likes it, blah, blah, blah. She said, oh, no, it's much worse. My mother-in-law's coming in and changing a temperature on the stove under this pot. And then she complains to me it's not boiling enough. And then they're changing the temperature in the oven and the turkey and complaining it's not cooking fast enough. And then they turn up the heat on the potatoes and wonder why it's boiling over. That's poor governance.
Oh, totally.
Right?
Yeah, it is.
Customers going in and changing the dials.
Yeah. And that's the thing is that, if governance becomes compliance and SLAs and metrics, and you lose the connection between people, because let's face it, companies are nothing more than a collection of people, right? Culture is shared stories amongst a collection of people. If we have a really high performance team, it's a we thing, right? It's not an us and them thing. Because let's face it, if the supplier messes up and I'm the one who's managing the deal on the buy side, my client doesn't care that it's my supplier's fault. I get blamed anyway.
Right.
So why not we have a we, right? Why don't we work together? And because if it's us and them, it's doomed to fail no matter what. You get this all the time, right?
Yeah.
It's his fault.
Right.
And you're pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah.
Right. So if you do that, you've already broken something. So yes, we want the numbers, yet like an SLA, right? I don't want the supplier's money, but I want enough pain in place to make them pay attention to what was most important to me. So my SLAs are really my clue that says, look, this is what you need to pay attention to. And if all these things are going well, that doesn't mean there aren't other things that matter, but these are the most important things. So if the supplier's paying attention to the SLAs, great, but I don't want their money. I don't want to be administering, fee credits back and forth or something, right?
No, I don't. That's spare change in my supplier's pocket. I'm not interested in their spare change. I'm interested in performance, right? Yeah. Let me ask you this, though. We've got a rolling pandemic, as I stated at the beginning. How does governance change, or maybe it doesn't, when you're suddenly faced with another event from the pandemic, another closure, another series of stay-at-home orders, more supply chain disruption?
I think governance becomes much, much more important. Contractually, I don't think it changes, assuming it's good, but it's more important because this is where we may have a structure in place that, we got force majeure clause, we got, risk issue and opportunity planning, we've got business continuity, we got all this stuff in there, right? That's contractual that should cover anything, right? Everything from an invasion from Mars to a pandemic. But that doesn't mean that the contract actually does anything, right? It still gets down to the people, and it might be, we have this wonderful contract, I can't afford it anymore because my business reality has changed. And so if I got a great relationship, we can have a conversation around, if I reduce the SLAs, can you give me a discount that doesn't hurt you? Right. So I'm not, because I don't want to go beat my supplier up and say, cut your price, because I have the same problem we do, right?
Yeah. So
all that becomes is I bully my suppliers and my suppliers bully their subs and they bully their subs and everything gets dysfunctional. I'd much rather have, how do we work this out so you're still making a profit margin? Maybe it's a little lower, just given the reality of the situation, and I can still afford you, right? Because if we all share a pie, we all eat. If we throw the pie in the ground and stomp on it in a big fight, nobody eats, right? So
my guesstimation is that all 3 elements of that triangle are engaged, but for different reasons. That the executive level oversight is really setting the strategic decision. This is what we need to do, thinking several rolling quarters out. The operational at the other end of the triangle, the widest part of the triangle, is figuring out the business reality, the impacts. What is this really going to look like? If we eliminate this service, does it impact anything else? What is the cost? And then it's the middle is what's responsible for making sure that the executive strategic initiative is actually put into place with what the people at the operational level come up with. They're the glue so that the operational people aren't left siloed from the strategy.
That's really no different though than what we always do. It's just that the strategy has to change. So you need the people at the top to be looking across, are we going to take on debt? Are we going to go into an adjacent market? Are we going to drop a product line? Are we going to, right? What are we going to do as an enterprise and be nimble and react to change, right? But the headshed's always driving strategy. That's their job. It just might change. The middle layer is always going to be that sort of steering committee to make sure stuff gets done and translating the strategy into tactics and action, and it's going to be implemented at the operational level. So that I don't see that structure changing any. I just see what the conversations are. In real life, let's face it, those are the conversations we're having right now, right?
Yeah.
What do we need to do to change these contracts? I'm not going to get rid of almost any of my suppliers. I'm going to beat a few of them up on price, but not many. Most of those are commodity things. And everybody else, we're going to have a conversation, and we are having conversations around what do we need to do differently. So for example, my IT contracts, a lot of things are, assuring network bandwidth. The company I work for is one of the largest suppliers, one of the largest clients in the world of WebEx. WebEx is like Zoom, just different brand, right? Well, they came to us and said, hey, you guys are breaking this. Would you please not use video unless unless you really, really need it, because you're taking too much bandwidth. We're like, oh, okay, sure. Helps them out, helps us out. That had nothing to do with price or terms or SLAs or anything. It's just like they had to go get a bunch of capital investment, and until they made the capital investment, we were breaking stuff. So we're like, okay.
But
that's a simple example, right?
Yeah, but in governance, how does something like that work itself through the governance structure, for example?
Well, that one was just done at the operational level, right? So they had a conversation with the product owner, the product owner being an internal person. The internal person went, oh, no problem, went to our communications folks and basically sent a note out to, hundreds of thousands of people and said, hey guys, until further notice, please don't use video unless you have to. It was really that's as simple as the conversation, right? Now there's things that are much more complex. We're trying to negotiate, go from, payment terms of like net 30 to net 90 or net 180 or whatever to try to save cash, or where we're talking about, I need to change this service, or I need to change the service level, or whatever it is, right? Those are different things. I'm going to go to my facilities contracts and say, yeah, we never had you sanitize stuff before, but you're going to do it now.
Yeah.
I don't know what sanitize means, so help me out here. Like what would you do, right? And so it's a two-way conversation kind of thing.
For companies that don't have good concept of governance, that's where the strategic is the vision is we're going to reopen the facilities. We're going to have fewer staff. The staff have to be protected in order for them to feel safe and protected.
Yep.
We're going to need to sanitize. Then there's the analysis at the operation level saying these are not part of our work scope, so you've got to renegotiate the work scope. And the steering committee is the level that runs interference when the operation team gets to a place where what it would cost to sanitize is cost prohibitive. So now the steering committee can help get that vision implemented by being able to, my perception is that the middle management steering committee has a greater event horizon than the operations people. So oftentimes by getting it there, and there's the supplier and the customer at that event horizon, they can solve past things that the operation people cannot see to solve.
Yes, but the operations people see things too. So for example, PPE and how do you give it out? And, they might say, hey, we want to scan everybody's temperature as they walk into the building. And we have a source to go buy scanners to do that because there's companies that make those. But that one might go all the way up to the executive level and talk to the attorneys and say, what's our liability if we do or if we don't? Because remember, if you scan somebody's temperature, a lot of people are asymptomatic that have COVID-19, right? That doesn't mean necessarily that they don't have a temperature, that they're not contagious. So now you've got an operation level going, well, for opening, we're going to do this, a management level going, hey, that sounds great. Let's make the supplier do that because we don't have the people, and what the heck, they're doing other things anyway. So might as well have them do it. And it goes up to the executive level, and they have a conversation with attorneys that says, is that a smart thing to do or a dumb thing to do from a liability perspective and from a, kind of relationship management perspective, and from just a community relations perspective, right? Because we want to demonstrate we care about our people, but there's more than one thing to think about in that, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, how do we do it? And then which supplier is going to do it, or suppliers? And then we can negotiate at the operational level with the contract.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, thank you very much for your time, Lawrence. This will close out our series on the rolling pandemic. I'm sure that as the summer and fall hit, there'll be more conversations that we'll want to have. But thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. And, the bottom line is, if you have good governance, you can accommodate almost anything and make it work. And that's really, that's really the point. That's why we did this one last, because let's face it, everything else ultimately boils down into governance to keep those relationships strong over time, so we can be, around to have this conversation in the future.
That's right. Yeah, that are the companies that we support are around. We want them all to survive this.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. You have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.